The palace had learned how to breathe without sound, but on that morning, even silence felt too loud. When Princess Anne crossed the threshold carrying a velvet-wrapped envelope sealed in deep crimson wax, every corridor seemed to tighten around her. Staff looked down. Doors closed a fraction quicker than usual. No one asked questions because everyone already felt the answer pressing in. This was not ceremony. This was consequence. Inside that envelope lived a truth Queen Elizabeth had protected for years, and the moment Anne chose to reveal it, the monarchy's balance shifted before a single word was spoken. Anne did not arrive with drama. She arrived with purpose. Clarence House, so often a place of rehearsed smiles and managed appearances, felt stripped bare as she walked through it. The seal on the envelope was unmistakable, the royal cipher untouched, preserved exactly as Elizabeth had left it. This was not memory. This was instruction. When Anne entered the council chamber and placed the letter at the center of the table, she did not sit. She waited. That pause alone told everyone present this meeting would not end the way it began. Camilla sat nearest the fire, posture composed, confidence worn like armor. Prince Edward watched Anne carefully. Others shifted in their seats, sensing history moving beneath their feet. When Anne finally spoke, her voice carried no anger, no triumph, only inevitability. She confirmed the letter's authenticity, its location beneath Windsor's East Wing, and its title, a final directive written in Elizabeth's own hand. This was not sentiment, it was authority preserved beyond death. As Anne began to read, the room fell into a stillness so complete it felt ritualistic. Elizabeth's words were precise, restrained, devastating in their clarity. She wrote of trust, of boundaries crossed quietly, of authority extended and misused. When Anne reached the line declaring that royal authority could be recalled if wielded outside sovereign trust, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Camilla did not speak. She did not need to. The letter had already spoken for her. This was the rupture no one had prepared for. Not gossip, not speculation. A queen, speaking from beyond the grave, reclaiming control through the one child she trusted to act without hesitation. Anne did not flinch, even as the weight of generations pressed against her. She was no longer just a daughter. She was executioner of a final royal will. And if this revelation shocked you, stay with us, because this letter was only the beginning. What Queen Elizabeth foresaw, and why Camilla triggered it herself, is where this story truly explodes. The room did not erupt when Anne finished reading the opening lines. It did the opposite. It collapsed inward, swallowed by a silence so dense it felt ceremonial. Every person present understood this was no ordinary document. This was not sentiment. This was judgment, measured and deliberate, written by a monarch who never acted without consequence. Anne allowed the pause to stretch. She did not rush. She knew the weight of anticipation was part of the Queen's design. The longer the silence held, the deeper the words would cut when they landed. Camilla shifted slightly, just enough for the scrape of fabric against wood to betray her unease. Anne continued, her voice unwavering as the letter moved from warning to instruction. The Queen wrote of guardianship, of how authority was never ownership but stewardship. She warned that when influence begins to operate unseen, when decisions drift from counsel into control, the crown itself begins to fracture from within. The words were precise, almost surgical. Elizabeth did not accuse emotionally. She documented dates, patterns, behaviors, Not rumors, not impressions, but a sequence of concerns that painted a picture impossible to dismiss. The letter made clear this had not been written in haste, but over time, with observation and restraint. Prince Edward lowered his gaze. Beatrice pressed her lips together, her knuckles whitening as she clasped her hands. No one interrupted, no one dared. Anne read on, her cadence steady, as the Queen outlined the threshold she had long feared would be crossed. Then came the line that shifted the air entirely. The Queen stated that should authority be exercised beyond sovereign trust, it must be reclaimed without hesitation. No consultation, no delay, no softening for appearances. The instruction was explicit, the execution entrusted solely to Anne. Camilla's composure finally cracked, not outwardly, but internally. Her stillness became rigid, her breathing shallow. She did not protest because she could not. The letter left no room. It anticipated resistance and disarmed it before it could form. Anne did not look at Camilla when she read the next passage. She didn't need to. The Queen's words did the looking for her. Elizabeth wrote that loyalty tested in silence reveals more than loyalty praised in public. It was a sentence that hung like a verdict. What unsettled the room most was not what the Queen condemned, but what she foresaw. She warned of a moment when internal ambition would present itself as modernization, when quiet adjustments would disguise structural takeover. That moment, she wrote, would be the signal. Anne folded the letter slightly, then continued, explaining that the signal had come, not in speculation, in action, unauthorized decisions, bypassed counsel, a deliberate sidelining that fractured trust. Each example aligned too cleanly to deny. By the time Anne finished reading, the truth was no longer theoretical. It was present, undeniable, and irreversible. The Queen's voice, though gone, now filled the chamber more powerfully than any living one. Anne closed the letter carefully, as if sealing a chapter of history itself. She looked up, finally meeting the room's gaze. The silence that followed was no longer uncertainty, it was recognition. The Queen had spoken, and now the crown would respond. Anne did not ask for permission to proceed. She didn't consult the room, didn't glance toward the throne, and did not seek Charles's approval. That in itself was the moment everything shifted. For the first time, the council understood this was no longer a discussion about interpretation, it was execution. She stood, the Queen's letter still resting on the table like a relic that had finally awakened. Her posture was calm, almost restrained, but the authority in her presence was unmistakable. This was the Princess Royal in her truest form, not ceremonial, not symbolic, but decisive. The kind of authority that doesn't announce itself loudly because it doesn't need to. Anne stated plainly that the Queen's directive was no longer dormant. The threshold Elizabeth had warned of had been crossed, and therefore the response must be immediate. There would be no delays framed as decorum, no pauses disguised as courtesy. The instruction was clear, and Anne intended to follow it exactly as written. She announced the first action without embellishment. All discretionary authority previously exercised without council approval would be suspended, effective immediately. The words landed like a controlled detonation. No raised voices, no gasps, just the quiet realization that power was being pulled back in real time. Camilla finally spoke, her voice measured but strained. She questioned the scope, the process, the precedent. Anne did not interrupt her. She allowed Camilla to finish, then responded with a single sentence that ended the debate before it could begin. "This is not precedent," she said. "This is correction." Anne clarified that the Queen's letter did not seek humiliation or spectacle. It sought restoration. Authority was not being stripped publicly, but it was being reclaimed structurally. The distinction mattered, and Anne made sure everyone understood it. This was not punishment, this was containment. She then named the second measure. All ceremonial roles altered or reassigned without full council consent would be reviewed and, where necessary, reversed. Eyes instinctively turned toward Camilla, though Anne never acknowledged the movement. She did not need to point fingers. The architecture of the decision did that on its own. The tension in the room was no longer emotional, it was procedural. Advisors shifted uncomfortably because they recognized what was happening. This was a legal and institutional reset, anchored in the late Queen's authority, not a family dispute. Anne went further. Oversight of royal patronages would temporarily transfer to a neutral channel until integrity could be verified. Then she named that channel. Catherine. The room reacted instantly, not with objection, but with understanding. It made sense in a way that felt both shocking and inevitable. Catherine had not asked for this. That fact mattered. Anne emphasized it. The Queen had trusted those who did not seek power, and this transfer reflected that philosophy. Catherine's role would be expanded, not as elevation, but as stabilization. Camilla did not respond this time. She sat motionless, absorbing the reality that the ground beneath her influence had shifted quietly but completely. No confrontation, no scene, just removal by design. Anne concluded by stating that the council would formalize these changes within the hour. Not tomorrow, not after press consultation, now. The Queen's instruction had waited long enough. As she sat back down, the room understood what had just occurred. This was not rebellion, this was obedience to a higher authority than any living royal present. And with that realization came something far more unsettling than conflict: acceptance. The palace did not erupt after the council adjourned. There were no raised voices in the corridors, no frantic calls to the press, no dramatic exits caught on camera. Instead, Windsor settled into a silence so deliberate it felt engineered. This was the kind of quiet that follows an irreversible decision, when everyone knows history has shifted and there is no benefit left in pretending otherwise. Camilla left through a side corridor, her step steady, her expression carefully composed. To onlookers it might have appeared dignified. To those inside, it was unmistakable retreat. Her aides followed at a distance, no longer orbiting her with the confidence they once carried. Authority, once withdrawn, changes the temperature of every room it leaves behind. Within minutes, Anne's instructions were already in motion. Clerks updated registries. Private secretaries paused correspondence awaiting reauthorization. Long-standing routines quietly broke apart, replaced by interim protocols that bore one clear signature of intent. Order was being restored, not loudly, but efficiently. Catherine was escorted not to a celebratory space, but to a briefing room. That choice was intentional. There were no congratulations, no ceremony, no performative acknowledgement. Anne addressed her directly, with a tone that blended firmness and protection. This was not about promotion, this was about responsibility. Catherine listened without interruption, absorbing the scope of what had just been placed upon her. She did not smile, she did not hesitate. Her response was simple and measured. She would serve as required. That restraint echoed precisely what the late Queen had valued most, and Anne saw it instantly. Outside palace walls, the story began to fracture. Whispers reached royal correspondents before official statements could. Something had happened, something big. But details were scarce, and that uncertainty only fueled speculation. Social feeds ignited with theories, fragments, half-confirmations. the absence of denial spoke louder than any leak. By evening, the press office released a statement, carefully worded, deliberately restrained. Certain ceremonial responsibilities had been reassigned in accordance with established constitutional principles. No names, no accusations. Just enough truth to confirm that change had occurred without revealing its full shape. The public reaction was immediate and divided. Some praised the firmness, others sensed betrayal. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing: Catherine's sudden centrality was not accidental. Images of her entering engagements days later were scrutinized frame by frame, her posture, her expressions, the calm steadiness that now carried added weight. Inside the palace, Anne remained vigilant. She knew this phase was the most dangerous, not confrontation, but consolidation. Power vacuums invite narrative warfare, and she would not allow the Queen's final wishes to be diluted by rumor or resentment. She instructed that all future communications involving Catherine's expanded role be precise, minimal, and transparent. No spin, no myth-making. Let consistency speak for itself. That, too, had been Elizabeth's way. As night settled over Windsor, Anne stood alone for a moment in the corridor outside the council chamber. The letter was no longer in her hands, but its burden remained. She had crossed a line few ever dare to cross. And yet, for the first time in weeks, the crown felt steadier. If you're following this unfolding story and want to understand what happens next, make sure you stay with us, because the final reckoning was still approaching. The final reckoning did not arrive with a confrontation broadcast to the world. It came quietly, deliberately, in the way the most permanent decisions often do. 3 days after the council's decision, Camilla's schedule was reduced to a skeleton outline. Engagements once confirmed were now listed as postponed. Invitations quietly expired. Doors that had always opened without question began to require confirmation. No announcement explained it. None needed to. Within the palace, everyone understood that access had changed. Influence, once assumed, now required authorization, and authorization no longer came automatically. Catherine's role, by contrast, stabilized with remarkable speed. She appeared where continuity mattered most. Charities resumed their work without disruption. Ceremonial duties flowed seamlessly. The absence of drama became the statement. Where others might have asserted visibility, Catherine practiced restraint, and that restraint became its own form of authority. Anne watched closely, intervening only when necessary. She corrected narratives before they could harden. She shut down internal disputes before they reached aides. This was not control for control's sake, it was guardianship. The Queen's final instruction had not been about replacing one figure with another. It had been about protecting the institution from erosion. The moment that sealed everything came without cameras. Camilla requested a private audience, not with the king, but with Catherine. The request alone spoke volumes. It was granted under strict conditions: no aides, no record, no statements afterward. Those who knew both women understood what that meeting represented. Not reconciliation, not apology, closure. When Camilla emerged, her expression was unchanged, but something fundamental had shifted. Later that evening, 3 portraits were quietly removed from prominent corridors. No announcement accompanied their removal. Silence did the work. The palace released a final clarification the following morning. The monarchy reaffirmed its commitment to duty, transparency, and continuity in alignment with the late Queen's expressed wishes. Again, no names, no drama, just direction. Public reactions settled into something steadier than outrage: acceptance. Polls shifted. Commentators recalibrated. What initially felt like upheaval now appeared, to many, like course correction long delayed. Catherine's composure became the focal point, not ambition, not rivalry, composure. Anne returned the Queen's letter to its vault, this time unsealed, its purpose fulfilled. She had carried it as instructed, and she had acted when required. History would debate her actions, that was inevitable, but the crown, for now, stood intact. And Catherine, walking through palace halls once thick with tension, now moved through something closer to calm, not triumph, responsibility. The kind that doesn't celebrate itself because it understands what is at stake. If you want to stay ahead of every royal shift, every hidden move, and every story the palace doesn't want discussed, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the monarchy may never say it out loud, but the truth always finds a way to surface.